Welcome to Lift Your Story podcast with guest Ari Gronich, the performance therapist, founder and CEO of Achieve Health USA and Performance Therapy Academy. Hi everyone, I'm Lorianne. I am that gal from Mississauga, Ontario, Canada, and I'm with.
I am that guy. I am Roy Miller from Dallas, Texas. Welcome to our Lift Your Story podcast.
So in this episode today, we are joined by our newest guest, Ari Gronich, and he is the performance therapist, one of the most sought after therapists and trainers for elite athletes, corporate culture, and wellness, and international keynote speaker. He is the founder of and CEO of Achieve Health USA and the Performance Therapy Academy, and can be found interviewing world changers on his podcast, Create a New Tomorrow. Please welcome Ari. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So how'd you get into this?
So it's an interesting story. I'll shrink it down in a bite-sized bit, but basically I was a gymnast, martial artist, played tennis, did long distance cycling as a kid. So I was an athlete. And at about 7 years old, I started going through symptoms and signs of menopause. Interestingly enough, hot flashes, migraines, going through estrogen spikes, and then I started gaining weight. I wasn't going through puberty at all. So I was a medical mystery, had to be injected into puberty. I was, pretty much like working with the medical system, but also because I was an athlete, I was going to a chiropractor, and because of certain other traumas in my life, including molestation and so forth, I was going to therapists and hypnotherapists and learning about self-improvement in a really odd way. And so you combine my medical issues with the traumas that I experienced. And at 18 years old, I ended up graduated, and my parents decided to take us whitewater rafting. I was taking a homeopathic remedy of snake venom, and that combined with caffeine from Mountain Dew, heat stroke, sunstroke, and allergic reaction. And I ended up in anaphylactic shock. By the time I got to the hospital, I was already not breathing. It took them about 26 minutes to bring me back. And about 3 days later, I sat up in the hospital and I said, I think I need to be a healer. So that's how I got started.
26 minutes?
Yeah.
And it didn't do any permanent brain damage or anything to you?
Well, anybody can say what they want about the quality of my brain and thinking, but no, I just was really ultra focused on a specific thing that I was to be. I have history. So my great grandfather was a doctor in Peru, and he was almost asked to be president of Peru, ended up becoming a political prisoner, but he had started and wrote some of the system of medicine that they have there. And how he did that was working on the mine owners. This is late 1800s, early 1900s. They would always get sick. He said, well, let me work on the miners, and then you won't get sick because they'll be taken care of, and they're the ones getting you sick because they're the ones down in the mines. And so that was like the first employer-based healthcare in Peru. And so I always had this internal need to be in some form of healing arts, whether it be a doctor, a veterinarian. At one point, I wanted to be a veterinarian, but some sort of healing arts. And at 5 years old, I had gotten paid for my first massage at a party. So it was $2. It was better than allowance. And so I think that it just kind of was what was supposed to be. You know what I mean? So brain damage, not so much, but a definite focused career path.
So it's all homeopathic, natural is what the route you took?
Well, that's the route somewhat that I took. So I took both routes. I did a lot of the scientific training, anatomy and physiology and kinesiology and pathology and learning all the science. And then I learned a lot of the woo-woo on the side. So the energy work, the Reiki, the Tantra, the Lomi, the different, energy modalities and hypnosis and EFT and so on. So it was an interesting dichotomy because I went both sides. But I'll give you an example. When I was about my third month in school, my school backed up to the campuses of Intel, Nike, and Tektronix in Beaverton, Oregon. And so thinking, okay, we need patients for our clinic. Let's bring our clinic to them. I did not know what I was doing at the time. I started 3 of the first corporate wellness programs in the country by bringing therapy to these companies. But I'm at Tektronix, and a gentleman in his mid-60s, engineer, scientist, asks me, what about this energy work thing? And this is the first time I think my brain went into a bridge and started building these bridges between languages. But I thought about it for a minute, and then I said, well, you're an engineer, right? Yes. So you can measure wavelengths. Okay. So we know that our palms put off what's called far infrared wavelength or heat signature. So it's a far infrared wave. We know that far infrared waves penetrate 2 to 3 inches into the body. We can measure that, right? He agrees. Yes, we can measure that. So if I put my hand near your body, not even on your body, I'm sending a signal, a wavelength through your body 2 to 3 inches, causing an inflammatory response. It causes heat. That inflammatory response then causes your brain to send chemistry to signal what's going on down there. Let's send some painkillers. Let's send some exploratory, the cells. Let's find out what's happening in this area that's being heated or inflamed. And that causes the body to start beginning repair. So even if I'm not touching, I'm sending a heat signature or a wave of energy that we can measure. And he agrees that, okay, I could get, so everything to me is science. Everything, the woo-woo, the everything is science. The only difference is that some science has been studied and some has not, right? So things like herbs and nutrition have been studied, but not necessarily as whole plants in very controlled environments. And so what do? They isolate out chemicals and they create pharmaceuticals based on those natural products. And unfortunately, when they do that, they miss a little bit of what I would consider the God factor, which is that we can't see all of the places that God put something, right? We don't see all the facets. And so we're going to miss things. And so we miss cofactors and enzymes and different things when we take out that whole plant that cause the plant to actually work more effectively with less side effects. And we end up accentuating side effects, right? But it's all science. It's all science.
It's interesting because we've had several guests that talk about energy. And, for the average person, when you start saying that kind of stuff, they kind of look at you like, well, you're some kind of wing nut here, buddy. What are you talking about? But it is real.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can't see the signal coming from the satellite that's sending a picture and sound to your TV, right? It's energy, it's a wavelength, it's a frequency, right? We have to tune into the frequency to see that channel or that show. Well, it's the same thing. So people may not understand how a telephone can, you could talk to China in half a second or a millisecond, your voice transmits. You don't have to know all of the technology to know that it's true, right? It's one of the things I like. You don't have to believe it for it to be a fact.
Yeah, exactly. So you started working in the corporate. How is that going for you?
It's interesting, especially during these interesting times, because a lot of people are no longer inside of the company. And a lot of what I was doing with corporations is inside their company, helping with fitness programs, helping with how do you exercise and stay focused and productive from your chair. Um, the average employee for an 8-hour day, the productivity is 3 hours. And so if you can increase that to even 4 hours, right, you're increasing a massive amount of production, especially you compound that with all the employees, right? So anything that you could do as a company to increase your employees' health is going to increase their focus, their ability to do their job better, and the ability to problem solve. It helps create loyalty. There's all kinds of things that happen when done correctly. Unfortunately, a lot of it isn't done correctly and not measured in a way that, when they measure only hard costs, you're not measuring properly for return on investment. And so there's some of that has been a struggle with big companies, is getting them to realize the intrinsic value of an employee lasting 6 months longer than they would have otherwise, or a year longer, or 2 years longer. What's the difference in how the cost of training, the cost of loyalty, the cost of, all these different things that are soft costs. So with corporate, that's been the issue. And these days, I work a lot with entrepreneurs who are stuck in their traumas. They're stuck in whatever the fears, whatever the belief systems are that are holding them back from doing business well. And so I look at the language of trauma, something that I talk a lot about these days. And the language of trauma is not English. And so we've been talking to trauma like it speaks English. Cognitive behavioral therapy has 100 years proven of not working. Our mental health in this country is proven to be at an all-time low compared to what it was even 100, 50, 60 years ago. And so if you look at why that is, well, trauma doesn't speak English. We can understand trauma, but it's not going to change our behavior. It's like understanding that a pack of cigarettes is going to be at the very least bad for you, and yet you still do it because you have the cognitive understanding, but not the automatic response system, which is your nervous system. It's your tissue. That's where the trauma lives. So trauma speaks in sound, in vibration, in touch, in movement, right? That's what trauma speaks in experience. And it requires typically other people involved, because other people typically are the ones that cause the trauma. And so if you're not activating the tissue as you're dealing with these traumatic experiences, then all you're doing is having a cognitive understanding. And if you can understand, like, the brain is a processing unit, not the memory bank. People think that the brain is the memory bank, but it's not. The tissue is, the soma, the soft tissue. That's where the memory lies. This is the processing unit. And so if we process trauma through the processing unit only, then we have a cognitive understanding and we can change a behavior. But as soon as something hits the fan, you back into that automatic response system. And so that's where you hear people all the time, I thought I worked on that. I thought I took care of that. I thought I was done with that one. But trauma doesn't deal with cognition. It's not a logical thing, right? You get hit and it's a ow. It's a movement and a physical reaction. And so if you recognize that, then you can start talking to it where it lives. And when you start talking to it where it lives, which is physical touch and sound and vibration and movement, now you can actually let it go and release that. So you have understanding, you have released the issues that are in the tissues, and then you could go about your life and using the knowledge without it blocking and stopping you from business and life.
How hard is it for most people to make the change, would you say?
So when you talk to trauma where it lives, it's not fun. It's simple. It's easy, but it's not fun, right? I mean, in some cases, screaming and crying in front of a mirror until you find every aspect of yourself that you love. Most people can't look in a mirror for 10 seconds deeply into their own self. So one of the things that I tell people is mirror work is so important. Being able to stare at yourself naked in the mirror until you find every aspect of you that you love is hard, right? But it's simple. And the more you do that, the more clean you get, the more you shed those layers of trauma that other people have thrown on you. You know, we're not broken. There's nothing that needs to be fixed. It's just these layers of trauma that people have put upon us that we need to shed off. And as we do that, we become more authentic, more ourselves. And as we do that, people are drawn to us in our business and whatever it is that we're doing.
Oh, that makes sense.
It's interesting. I'm trying to envision it. So, it would be almost like wearing, you know, like say people will dress themselves to cover who they truly are, and that would be it's like a dressing on a tissue that you have to remove. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, think about all the weight that people have on. It's just a covering. Why are you covering up? You know, like if you look at it, like, what are you covering up? Why are you covering up? What is it about you that you need to stuff? You know, like weight is typically you're stuffing your trauma, you're stuffing stuff. So you're holding on to what's there. I mean, all of these things that we say are inside of the body. So if we say them and we know that, then why don't we do our therapy and our treatment to go along with what we say, right? If you're traumatized, you know, like it was a gut shot. Yeah, it was in your gut. That's where that trauma lives. That's where you feel it. That's where you have to deal with it, right? You can't deal with the gut shot in a logical way because nothing in life happens in your head.
It's true. You do get the feeling, the physical feelings, because we were talking about that. Why is it when you're in pain, let's say you lost somebody, and when you like you feel like you're choking? Like it's not your head that's hurt. It's actually you feel like you can't, someone's choking. And I
Breathe.
feel that everyone has felt that, but I know a lot of people have said that they felt that.
Yeah, so we go back to Chinese medicine a little bit, right? So lungs have to do with inspiration and expiration. So if you can't breathe, you're not being inspired. You're not expiring the stuff out of you. You're not letting things flow. Also, in that case, breath is the only thing that brings you back to the present because you cannot breathe in the future or in the past. You can only breathe now. And so when we breathe consciously, we literally take ourselves directly into the present moment. So it's an interesting thing to do, but lungs have to do with joy of life, breathing in life, right? So liver has to do with anger. Kidneys are worry. Pancreas is the sweetness of life. These organs deal with exactly what our bodies do, right? Pancreas deals with the sweetness, the sugars, right? It relates exactly. If the sweetness of life has left you, like pancreatic issues gonna come in. So each organ has the thing. If you're not content, you know, you feel that typically in your stomach. If you don't feel supported, low back pain. All of this happens in our bodies from our emotions.
Yeah. I think our emotions have a lot of control over us.
Yes, absolutely.
Not always in a good way.
Not always in a beneficial way in that moment, but here's the problem is that we have made emotions so negative, an expression of emotions so negative, especially for men with things like anger and rage, right? But emotional expression we have made so negative that we stuff and we stuff and we stuff and we stuff and we stuff instead of expressing the minor things, the times that they happen when they happen, right? So by stuffing these emotions instead of honoring them and respecting them as a useful tool, because that's what they are, if you recognize them and if you use them, then we stuff them and we stuff them. And, you know, everybody's tank is only so big. Eventually you're going to blow. And so what we have now in this world is a powder keg ready to blow. You know, a lot of people have been stuffing a lot of stuff for a long time. And when that happens, it's a pressure cooker that has only so many ways to release that pressure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any way that, like, I don't know, I know that I've known a few people, I even went through therapy at one point too, and the one that I had, I enjoyed because it balanced out, bring out the trauma with the positives, right? So like, it was a nice mix, although I've had some friends who have gone through therapy and I come back and go, is there anything positive that you got out of this? Like, it's all, and I don't know if it exemplifies those traumas by going through it. Maybe they have to do that before they get better or something, but mine was such a balance and different. I don't know if you have anything to speak to that.
There's quality in everybody and everything. I find that the quality is more in the human being than in the technique. So if you're in front of somebody who actually gives a shit about you and wants for you to be better, then they're going to do everything in their power to get you the results. They're going to use every tool that they have. When it's somebody who is just looking for a paycheck, then they're going to do whatever they can to get you out of there as soon as possible, doing as little as possible and not necessarily getting the results. So this is the medical system. This is the psychological system. We are a procedure-based system, which is the absolute worst kind of system that you could have. So incentive-wise, for people to get paid, for people to be healthy. So one thing that we change is the incentive, and it completely shifts the entire system because the system has to morph to fit the incentive. So if we change the incentive to results, everything has to shift to get those results. You only get paid for the result, not for the procedure, right? So if you have 100 years and you're watching, you know, a client 15 years that you've had every week that you're working on this person and they're coming back and coming back, what's the result? They feel comfortable talking to you. That's the result. And that's about it. You're basically a paid friend, right? That's the truth, because the therapy is not in cognitively being aware and talking about your problems. It's getting those problems out of you, moving the memories and the traumas from the tissues outside of your body, outside of your energetic body, your physical body, away from where you are, so that you're not bringing them back in, right? Neural pathways have to be regrooved, and those require new somatic experiences in safety, right? So if you have an experience that you're trying to relive, let's say it's a sexual trauma, you have to experience a sexual experience enough times in a safe way for your neural pathway to say, this is a safe thing for me to do now, right? It's not going to do it just by cognitively understanding that not everybody is my victimizer.
Yeah.
That's not what does it. We've seen it over and over again with people who have been in therapy. It doesn't work. It has to have somatic trauma requires somatic responses and somatic therapies, right? And so everything that we do has to be focused on a result. What is the result we're going to get from this? If it's cognitive understanding, okay. If it's maybe changing a habit or a behavior, okay. But then trigger that person with whatever it is that triggers them and see what their response is. My experience is that it's an automatic response system, right? It's like driving a car to and from work, and you never know that you're like, wait, I'm going to try a different route today. And then you go the same way because it's automatic response system, you know?
Yeah.
So this is a common thing. And unfortunately, nobody seems to recognize it. Trauma doesn't speak English. You can't talk to it. It doesn't understand what you're saying.
So, Ari, how can our listeners reach out to you?
So it could find me Chief Health USA, or Create a New Tomorrow is the podcast. So Create a New Tomorrow is here, Achieve Health USA over here. Ari Gronich at everywhere.com. I'm the only one on the planet that I found that has my name.
Cool.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing this.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. You know, I want so much for people to not have to live in the kind of pain and suffering that I've lived in and that I see people living in. I've had 28 friends commit suicide over my, you know, from my childhood mostly. That was always a response that was acceptable. And it can't be that that's an acceptable response, right? And so how do I get 1,000 therapists who are talking to trauma to stop talking to trauma and start dealing with trauma where it lives? And if I do that, how many people do they get to affect?
Mm-hmm.
And if they do that, how many people do they get to affect? I had an amazing experience once of a gentleman at a party who I was in my early 20s, and I met him about 8 years later, and he was a psychologist actually. And like in his 50s, very well known in Los Angeles. I hugged him at a party because that's who I am. I'm a hugger. What I did not know was that his family was not. Not only were they not, but they had not hugged, like he had not hugged his brother in decades. So what I found out 8 years later is that after that party, he was in New York and with his brother, and they were about to leave each other, and he hugged his brother and then held him close. It was the first time, and he started crying, and then his brother started crying, and then fascinating thing happened. His entire family has now become affectionate with each other. Changed an entire family's life from one hug that I had no idea I was doing, right? So what are the impacts that you're having and everybody else is having on people that you'll never, ever, ever hear and know of? And if you touched somebody, right, in where their trauma lives, and were able to be with them and just sit with them in their pain and not have an agenda, and not have a place that you needed to take them, and not be about anything else other than I'm sitting with this person in their pain. You know how healing just that alone is for people? How many times they've been told they should feel differently than they feel, and what it is like just to say, it's okay, feel however you want. express it, get it out, let it go, drive it deeper. It's like the most healing thing for people. It lets a weight come off of them. And so to me, it's like an obligation, I feel. I've never seen anybody talk about trauma this way. I'm a sports therapist who helps Olympic athletes go from injuries to gold medals. How did I get to this place, right? Well, somebody who's an athlete, minutia matters. The littlest of things matters. Tenths of seconds matters. And so you have to know how to affect that person on all levels so that they can compete at their highest level. And so I just learned how to read between the lines, I guess. Look at the languages that weren't being spoken. And unfortunately, in some cases, I don't see what's right in front of me. I only see what's between, in the space between what's not being said. But I feel like it's just a mission to get this kind of stuff out. I want more people to be able to do this kind of work.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. We really enjoyed it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
This episode is brought to you by Myono, featuring their multifunctional USB microphone, very light, portable, affordable, and great for podcasters, and available on Amazon.